Hello and welcome to Play Pause Turn, or should we call it Mirror Signal Manoeuvre? More on that later on. In this podcast, we're going to discuss all things to do with TV, films, games, literature and possibly tech today. We also give our thoughts on any media or driving experiences we've been enjoying, old or new, and comment on anything else topical. Today, I'm John, by the way, hello, as always, and I'm joined by Amy and Alex, and I'm going to ask them our usual icebreaker question, but also maybe after our icebreaker I'll explain what we're talking about this week, because it's a little bit of a change to what we normally talk about. So, here's our first icebreaker question. Amy, okay, and this will make sense later on. Apart from range, what would be your one dream feature to have in an electric vehicle?
For me, it would be a magical app where you press a button, and that means that in the morning your car is magically defrosted and warm for you and ready to go.
Okay, I've already got that in my EV. Haven't you got that in your Leaf as well?
We did used to, but we've upgraded, and the things with upgrades is they don't always upgrade the things you want.
Actually, you say that, but Nissan have also upgraded all their vehicles. So if you still own an early Leaf like I do, the app no longer works. So I'm with you on that feature, because that for me was one of the sales points. I'll come to this later on. But yeah, okay, I agree with you completely on that one. How about you, Alex?
Hi. So I would really like a up-to-date version of a CB radio, so that you could go in a convoy. And you could just be like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. We're feeling a bit peckish. Oh, right. Should we take the next services? Yeah, let's take the next services.
That's a big 10-4 rubber duck.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I want. I want an Austin Powers experience on my EV.
I like that. That could be a feature that some companies could push as a sort of extra feature, as long as they don't charge extra for it, like Elon Musk does even. I would like, and this is obviously giving you a little indication of what we're going to talk about today. I would like, mine seems a bit more functional than yours. I would like wireless charging on all roads. Now, I know that technology does exist in tests in Norway. I know BMW got as far as offering a wireless charging system for their 530e, their plug-in hybrid, where you could sort of reverse onto a wireless plate like the iPhone charges and charge in a garage. But I would like wireless charging across all of the roads in the UK, and I think then that could be where road tax comes from to pay for that. We'd have to end up paying road tax for it. But I did do some research today, and apparently the UK is looking into wireless under-road charging infrastructure. If you go to a website called Green Optimistic, there's some news stories on that. So let's just talk about our topic today. And our topic today is, should you buy an electric vehicle, an EV, in 2021? Myself and Alex got into a long conversation on Twitter with another user. I don't know who he was, but he was a very nice person, about range of vehicles. I think they were doing some research, weren't they, from users?
Yeah, and
is that right,
we
Alex?
were talking to Bobby as well, because we were saying we were having a discussion about how much range is enough range, and it's something that we'll come on to, but the figures varied wildly, but they were all enormous. Like, there was no one who wanted less than 250 mile range, including us, I think. Yeah. Which was surprising, because we happen to all be EV drivers. So
that's something we should make clear, isn't it? Actually, everybody here owns an electric vehicle, henceforth EV, and so we do have some good opinions to have here. But I think it's going to be really interesting to sort of talk about all aspects of electric vehicles, and maybe if you're listening to this and you're on the electric fence right now about buying one, this might sway your decision. I find quite a lot, I don't know about you both, that if I tell someone I am an electric vehicle driver, they go, oh really? What range does it have? That's the first question I get asked. What range does it have? And so range will feature quite a lot, especially when the answer I give them, they go, oh, that's not very much, or I would never get one of those. I think the times are changing, but we're on the tipping point, really, aren't we? Yeah. So let's put forward, it's almost a debate this today, isn't it, really? Let's put forward some points on why we should or should not buy an EV in 2021. And there's quite a lot of terminology around electric vehicles. If you're in the know, it's a bit like being in Harry Potter and talking about muggles here, isn't it, really? Yeah. If you're in the know, you'll know some of these abbreviations. Some of the ones you hear is like ICE, which stands for internal combustion engine. EV, electric vehicle hybrid, where there's a mixture of fuel-based motor and electric inside the vehicle in different ways. But there are also other terminology in terms of how the vehicles are charged. We may come to that later on. But we've got a few questions we put in front of us here, and I think the first point of discussion we should really have is our personal experiences about owning the vehicles. So, Alex and Amy, you've had a Mark II Leaf since 2014.
Yes.
How's it been for you?
Yeah, so we should probably preface this by saying I love listening to Robert Llewellyn. Robert Llewellyn has been harping on about electric vehicles for a long time. And we also are avid readers of his books as well. One of the books that he wrote was it's a News From series. And the News From series is... I wouldn't. It is fictional, but it's not. There's not really a massive plot. It's more of a thinking point for how Robert feels like the world might go, and so he looks at it in one view, and then he looks at it in another view, and looks at it in another view, and he gets around all of these by his electric powered plane, which is impressive.
Oh yeah.
So and so we went to a conference where he was talking.
It was called London Geek Fest, and it had loads of different people speaking. And of course, I've always loved Red Dwarf, and we thought Robert Llewellyn speaking, that'll be interesting. Little did we know that he would cost us thousands of pounds.
I knew this a little bit up front, but I kept this quiet because it's always best to go into the purchasing decision with some research, and then
make sure Amy thinks it was her idea in the first place.
Well, Amy needs to sign off on any decisions like this, so it's very important. But anyway, so we ended up being inspired from this talk and saying, well, why don't we get a Leaf? Now we should let people know that we are a 2-car family, and so we were going to be replacing. I can't remember what we had now. Was it Yeti?
It was my lovely Skoda Yeti, which is still maintained is one of my favourite car we've ever owned. The Skoda Yeti just felt comfy and safe, and it was our car, and it was brilliant. It did all the things you wanted it to do really well. And I always said if we could ever get an electric engine in a Skoda Yeti, I'd jump on it.
They're very comfortable workhorses, aren't they, the Skodas?
Yeah, really good. But that wasn't an option at the time. So instead we started looking online thinking, let's just have a look and see if it's feasible, see how much it is. And then we realised it was actually really, really doable, in that, yes, we would at some point need to get a charger on the side of the building, but actually you can get a car, certainly back in 2014, and you can charge it for free at sort of chargers at that point in time. And you can just plug it into the granny plug overnight under the garage door, and it's absolutely fine. And that lovely little Leaf got me from Milton Keynes to Central Milton Keynes to Hemel Hempstead to, I think, possibly Bedford, and then back to Milton Keynes to pick up my daughter in one run in one day. And in terms of range, that's all we needed. So that's what we had.
And it's probably worth saying that I actually took it from Milton Keynes to Peterborough, which is a 65-mile 65-mile drive. Now, I'll be honest, that was taking it right to the edge of what it could probably do. But knowing that I could park and charge at my destination in a shopping centre meant that I didn't worry too much about it. And this was over the summer, so there was no issues really with range. And so it did some fairly long journeys. In fact, we even took it to the south coast once, although it was somewhat painful having to charge, I think, 3 times before we got to our destination.
It was a very long day with a 4-year-old. Very long.
I think we were, I think we were we were quite naive about driving an EV, but also I think we were really enthusiastic. So you would find us doing journeys that, when there would be a perfectly good petrol car sitting next to it that you could have used that wouldn't have had any issues, we'd still go for the Leaf.
That's really interesting because it sounds like a very similar experience to myself and my wife, actually. So we replaced our Skoda with a Leaf. We had a Skoda Fabio Estate, and we made the decision to go completely electric. So we only have our Leaf, and I think it's the 2017 Tecna Leaf, which I think is the 30 kilowatt battery.
Yes, that's right, 30 kilowatt.
So when we bought it brand new, directly from Nissan, and it had about 100. On the box it said 120 to 155, but we've only ever got a maximum of 130 out of it.
Wow, that's good.
Which was great, and we were just like you, massively naive when we first drove it. So we took a trip down to Monmouth, and it's a good sort of 4.5-5 hour drive to Monmouth with stops when you go down with 2 children. And we planned to go down there, and it was summer again, and we meticulously planned our route because we were very, it was a new car, and we were still suffering from range anxiety. And I think that's something that a lot of people worry about with electric cars, is range anxiety. We managed to time it the same weekend that the M4 was shut down for roadworks for Bill Middleton's wedding. And so all our plans and we'd use that map and everything to get down there were completely scotched. We had to go through Newbury. We ended up driving through Newbury looking for the nearest. And again, quite naive on the I don't know if you found this on the sat nav on the Leaf. The charge points it shows you aren't always public plug and play charge. Some of these were like privately owned charge points or industry charge points. So we got to some industrial estate somewhere near Newbury with about 17 miles left on the range. Hopefully trying to charge a car. We obviously couldn't charge it there, so we just carried on driving for the next one. We were in the middle of the countryside with 2 miles left on our clock. Driving down a dirt track.
I mean, that's squeaky bum time right there.
Yeah, I mean, both our kids learnt some new words in the car that day, that's for sure. And we drove past the entrance to this farm, and it just said Eco Farm. And we thought, well, this has got to be Providence. So we drove down the drive to it, and they had pod point charges for all the car parks for I think they're all BMW charge points, which, as you know, is not charge mode. It's AC rather than DC. Right. So it was the right fitting for the car, but it wouldn't charge the car. So and then it started to rain, and my wife started regretting buying an electric car. So I drove the car down into the forecourt, and because it's a farm, they had those rubber covered granny plugs on the exterior of the building, and they were very sweet. The Eco Centre let us plug in to charge, and we got the kids' homework done on the tables, and they brought out free drink for us and everything else. But it was a bit desperate, and we were there for about 4 hours, and that gave us enough mileage to get to the next charge point to then charge up again, and we made it to Monmouth 9 hours later. So it was a bit of a journey, and we learnt a lot. And I think new EV buyers won't have quite the same experience because the infrastructure is way better now, and we'll talk about that later on. But I think also there's a lot more experience that's been had by people. We are the pioneers, aren't we? We are the trailblazers here.
Yes, early adopters.
But we do love our Leaf, and we'll talk about our driving experiences in them. But I think the range that we have has been brilliant for what we wanted it for. We've driven down to Somerset and Wales in it many, many times and got used to the journey and the Russian roulette of charging points as we go down there. But I wouldn't go back, definitely not. But we'll come to that later on. So your Leaf had a range of 65 miles. So then you got a new a new EV now, haven't you?
Yes, so Amy can tell us all about this new car that we got recently.
Yes, we now are the proud owners. Well, now, first of all, we're down to one car. We're a one-car family now. And we've got an MG.
So you've got rid of the Leaf?
We got rid of the Leaf.
Oh, right.
And we also got rid of previously we had a Skoda Octavia as well.
Yeah.
But they've both gone, and we now have an MG ZS. Which is lovely. It's 20.
I've never heard of it.
It's really, really nice because we were watching, I think, with Alex being clever and planting seeds, he planted the seed in my head that actually I'd quite like to get a new car. And he kept putting all these different EV things on, and I just thought it was for him, all these different reviews. And then he brought up this review for an MG ZS, and I looked at it and went, that looks like the Skoda Yeti. And I was watching the review, and I was like, this is basically the Skoda Yeti with an electric engine in. I want that car. Now, that was about 4 months ago. And then we looked at, and this is another question for another podcast, should you buy a car outright or is it better to lease? So we now don't own a car. This is on lease. But I started looking at the options for leasing an EV, and it started from a little smart car. I'm not quite sure why you would lease an EV smart car that only does about 40 miles, but maybe if that's all the range you need, then that's fine.
City car, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And then I looked at my price range, and this was in my price range, and it's fantastic value for money. It's lovely. It lacks some of the things that I quite like to have, but it's brilliant, and the range is that much longer than our original Leaf. So yeah, we are really happy with it. We're still getting used to it.
What is the range on it?
The range on it, I think it will tell you something like 150. Real world, it will probably do about 130. However, in terms of, we keep saying range anxiety. Please don't worry about having range anxiety, listeners. No. It's fine, you get used to it. But for me, a little noise will go bing and say you need to charge at once it's about just over 100 miles. And regardless of the fact that it can then still do 30 miles, which is over half what the old Leaf could do, at that point we want to look for a charger. So we say it's 100 miles without any bother at all.
Which is pretty much what my Leaf does now. My Leaf has gone from 130 down to about 105 with the battery degradation. Which does happen. I mean, every vehicle has a shelf life. It's like your iPhone. Your iPhone drops in battery efficiency over time. But I presume if you're leasing, when that starts to happen, you can just replace it, can you? How does that work?
Well,
or is it more like PCP?
The thing is, it's like PCP in an extent, but basically after 4 years, you just hand it back and get a new car. So any battery degradation after 4 years should be minimal. And then the main thing is it's after that point when you really sort of want to, when you really go, things aren't going quite as far, but that won't be an issue if you're leasing. The other thing is that effect happens less the larger the battery is. So if you've got a bigger battery, then the actual degradation becomes less of an issue.
Okay. I mean, the Tecna that I have, the Leaf Tecna, was the last Leaf that was built without a TMS, without a thermal management system. So when we are driving down to Somerset, we can just keep charging, and basically the battery. So on an EV car, you won't see your petrol and your oil levels in your dash. You see your range. I don't know if it's different for your MG, but you also see battery temperature.
Yeah, we don't have that, but yours
because you probably have TMS now. Yeah, so the newer Leafs, the new models, you get to a certain temperature of the battery when you're charging. If you're driving over a long distance and charging multiple times, what happens is the car will slow down its charging. It will trickle charge slower and slower. So it will take you a lot longer to bring it up to top charge on a long distance. Whereas on my Leaf, I can keep going until it explodes. So there are pros and cons to that. You know, if you're in a colder weather, you can get away with it, but then in colder weather, you have less range because the battery's colder. We actually stopped at a charge point on the way up, and another Leaf owner next to us was charging his car with his bonnet open. And we asked him why, and he said, it keeps the battery cool because I'm charging it so much, which is a little bit scary, but was really interesting. And it did make me think about, well, maybe I'm pushing it a little bit too big. But generally speaking, in the UK, I mean, in the UK, driving from where I live in Kent to the West Country, that's not really an issue. I think if you're driving in Europe or in America over long distance, you'd have a real issue trying to go long distance in an electric car with the smaller range batteries because of that TMS issue. So I just find that something I've learned since owning an electric vehicle.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think things have got easier now with newer cars, so I think it's less of an issue for new drivers. I think the other thing that people forget is that, you know, when your range increases, say your range doubles, it sounds obvious, but you charge half as often, which means it's better for your battery anyway. So so you don't need to worry too much about these things. Yeah, we've gone through that pain, so you don't have to.
And also, I discovered actually with long distance charging is people have this initial tendency to try and charge fully at every stop. You don't need to do that.
No.
You don't need to charge a full charge. And in fact, with most electric cars, charging to about 80% is better for the battery, but also better. It makes more sense to have a shorter 50-minute charge and charge more often than stop for a longer charge when you're using a smaller battery. And so you do find these little systems going in place, which I found fascinating. But let's look at some electric vehicles. So we've done a bit of a top 5 list, all of us here. I've got a top 5, and so have Alex and Amy. Amy, if you want to add to this, because you've only got 5 between the two of you, by all means. We've been looking into sort of the most interesting, and again, when I looked at this in our agenda tonight, when Alex said most interesting, I went a bit more quirky than you.
Yeah. I think the thing is, we weren't thinking about budget, which is great.
No.
Whereas I was thinking about cars that not necessarily I could afford, but are close to what I can afford. Because I've been trying. The intention was that I got the EV, and Amy had the Leaf. But that didn't work out. So now Amy's got the ZS, and I don't have a car at the moment. So I'm looking for a car. But these are.
Oh, right. So you're looking for another one?
Well, yeah.
Will you go electric as well?
To be fair,
for another one.
I don't really need a car. But if I did need a car, I'd need an electric car. I don't want to buy another petrol car. So anyway, so you can get into my mind as the things that we thought about anyway, as we go through the car options.
Okay, so Alex, if you want to go through your list, Alex and Amy.
Yeah. So I think the main thing for EVs is, in general, look, there is a lot of concern about their cost, particularly the sticker price tends to be 5 to 10k more than the petrol version, and so the ones I've picked are somewhat more affordable, and the reason that that's important is, as we go on later on, the running costs are so much lower. So if you can get a car at an affordable rate, then you'll start getting money back from it sooner. So the ones that I've suggested are the Renault Zoe. The latest ones have a really, really good range, and they're really underrated. They're still one of the cheapest cars that you can buy. Have a bit of competition by the MG, actually. The MG itself, the MG ZS, is actually really affordable. But still, the Zoe is noticeably cheaper than a Nissan Leaf, which is like what people think.
It's one of the first cars we looked at, Alex, when we were looking at cars. The only thing that really stopped us from getting it was the boot size. Because it's quite a small. It's a real runabout small car. Yeah. And we do actually go camping in our Leaf, which people are always amazed when they see what unfolds from our boot of a Leaf. And we had to buy very individual special rails for the roof rack as well.
Oh wow! So it's like a game,
which were Leaf specific,
like a game of Tetris, then, to get everything in and out.
Yeah. The kids are a bit like sort of. You can just see their faces squashed between the cracks of all the kit in the back seat. But yes, so the Zoe. I mean, we really like the look of it, and I like the fact you could. It played different sounds. You could have different sounds coming out. And then the latest Zoe, I understand, has the rapid charge engine as well.
Yes.
It has the new, so you can charge it really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually got a really good. It's got a really good range. So, it's a 50 kilowatt thing, and it goes. Oh, there's 40 and 50 kilowatts, and it does between 150 and 190 miles, which actually it's pretty good.
Yeah, Karen, sorry.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. And its size will be a factor in that range as well, I imagine.
Yes.
But you do see this again if you're new to EVs, you'll see this. This is quite a common thing where the manufacturer will offer 2 different types of batteries for it. So they'll offer the lower capacity battery for the runaround, and maybe the higher one for people who want to go a bit further. And that's quite standard these days.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time. So one of the things that we get. Challenged a lot is, I'll buy an EV when battery technology gets good, and the answer to that is battery technology is already good. The only difference is that you want a bigger, want to go further, you need to have a bigger battery, and that's the bit that a lot of the time people go, oh well I thought it would be cheaper. I thought, right, okay, so now it's a money thing that we've got to discuss. And you're right, you want a bigger battery, you want to go further. It costs you more, whereas in a petrol car makes no difference, and so that's one of the things that you're not used to, but it is really important.
Well, yes, but it's only like getting a petrol car with a different capacity petrol engine. So our Skoda used to fill back in the days when it was economical to fill up a petrol vehicle. I would say between £55 and £60 for a full tank. But then if you're driving a Range Rover, you're looking at double that.
Yeah.
And so actually, and you're paying, it cost us, I think, to fill our battery up with our home electricity £1.50 for a full tank. And then obviously if you're paying at charge points along the motorway, somewhere between £4 and £5 to £6. I use Ecotricity quite a lot when I'm charging because they're our local ones. So yes, okay. Again, you're going to pay more for more range in a petrol car as well, and a diesel car. So the system is exactly the same. It's just the initial outlay.
It is the
if you
initial
want to go anything above 250 miles, you're going to pay 45, 50k higher, aren't you? And that's the way it is.
And that's
which is why leasing is quite a good idea.
Yeah,
really.
That's right. It is a good idea. It's also one of the challenges that we have at the moment. Without going off into too much of a tangent, but it's one of the challenges we have in the UK because the grant has just been reduced to 35 grand, which basically means that you can get, I think it's 3.5 grand off your a new EV price if your sticker price is under 35 grand. And the problem is that if people want longer range, then it's more expensive, and then it ends up being even more expensive, which is not ideal. So anyway, so then we looked at the MG ZS EV, which is actually surprisingly affordable. We should probably just qualify that the MG is obviously a well-known UK brand, but the car is actually built in China, so it's not an English car at all. It was bought by when Rover went under. They bought the Rover mark and the MG mark, and it was bought by a company called SAIC Motors in China. And so MG is their brand for EVs. Although the ZS, actually, there is a petrol equivalent of the ZS as well, which has also been quite successful. So not all of the ZSs are electric. But yeah, so for the money, the ZS actually ticks a few more boxes because it's a bigger car. It's got better, sort of more well equipped than Zoe, and it has a better quality of interior than Zoe. The range is not quite as good. It's about, as we said, about 130 is a real world range. But even so, that's actually significantly more than our previous car. And for the money, it's actually, you're getting quite a lot for that. So we think that's quite a good one, and that's why you'll find it for lease deals and things like that at the moment. It's very affordable.
To give you an idea, in terms of if you were to go and buy it off the rack, as it were, at the moment you can buy an MG ZS EV for around 26 grand.
And that's significantly under the 35 grand cap. It's also a lot cheaper than some of the other competitors. So, I mean, previously, before this came out, and before there's a whole range of new EVs coming out at the moment. But before this, it was literally, if you wanted a longer range car, it would be either the Tesla Model 3, the Kia e-Niro, or the Hyundai...
The Ioniq.
Ioniq, yeah.
Mm.
Were they not hybrids, though, the Ioniq?
No, there was a battery only version of the Ioniq as well. And so those would be your options, and that would be it.
The i5, I think.
Yeah. So and so those are good options. The e-Niro, for example, you'll see quite a lot of those on the road in the UK now. But the main challenge is that they are limited by the number of cars that get shipped to the UK. They're severely restrained, and there's quite a long waiting list to get hold of them. It's improved somewhat now, but for a big period there was a 6 to 9 month waiting list. And the same was true of the Tesla Model 3, which is an excellent car, but did have until recently quite a significant waiting list. Doesn't anymore. Yeah,
no, the Tesla Model 3, I think at the time I bought the Leaf, it was just about to come out.
Yeah.
I think, did it come out in 2018? It was a while. It was 2 or 3 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's
maybe
right.
A bit longer. And I remember at the time thinking, that's about the same. Because I think you could get one. I think you could get one for 37.
It was in the UK in
price.
2019, but it was advertised and in the US in 2018. And at the time, it was 37 or 38k, which was for the like absolute basic model. In fact, I think
Yeah.
they had an off-book model that was like standard range, not standard range plus, which is what they've done now.
So that's what our Tecma cost us. We went because we went for the one with the Bose stereo system and the alloy wheels and the leather seats, because we went PCP, and the guy in the showroom said if you buy the nicer one you'll get a better return value to it. At the time, I was umming and ahhing about the Tesla, but I didn't want to wait for it, essentially.
Yeah.
And I'm not as big a fan of the interior and the design of the Tesla. And from what I hear, maybe it's changed now, but the early Tesla's build quality, the interior was pretty poor.
Yeah, so
in terms of the finishings, the plastic bits.
That was the main issue with Teslas, was the build quality wasn't as good as it should have been for that level of car. And things like panel gaps were being a bit inconsistent. That is still an issue, but the cars are now mainly made in China, the ones that we get. So that has obviously helped with costs from Tesla's point of view. Hasn't changed our costs at the moment, but
no.
And yeah, I think quality has generally become more consistent, and things have been improved.
I don't know how it is for you, Amy. Maybe because the demographic's different, but I teach in a prep school. So if you're not a UK listener, that's the prep school is the school where people pay to go, rather than based on state-funded schools. And I've noticed over the last 2 years a shift from all the parents sitting waiting for their little ones in their cars with their engines running in their 4x4s. We're a 4x4 showroom 2 or 3 years ago, and that's now shifting. And I've seen 4 or 5 Teslas on pickup. We've got a Porsche Taycan.
Oh, nice.
A parent of all the children in my class. She very kindly let me sit down and try it out and look inside it. So I do see now that especially the Teslas, and these are mostly not the Model 3s, but the Model S's.
Yeah.
They've now almost starting to replace, and it's a really good sign. I think it's really good. They're starting to replace the 4x4 BMWs, the X3s and things like that, as the next prestige parent pickup vehicle in our school, and I think that's really interesting. It's a good sign. I spend every year trying to convince our ground staff to install charge points in the school. But I think that's really interesting. Now you mentioned the Kia Niro, but you've got one more car on your list as well, haven't you?
Yeah. So the main thing that I found is there aren't that many saloon cars. So the Model 3 is the obvious one that people think of, the S being the bigger brother of the Model 3. Now the one that is a fairly new entrant is the Polestar 2 it's called. It's actually basically a Volvo sub-brand.
Yeah.
But it's really well built, and while the build is very much reminiscent of a Volvo car, obviously, it's really nice to drive, and has a reasonable amount of space in it, and that's coming in reasonably affordable. They only recently announced there would be a standard range model of this, which is at 40k. Which is
what's their standard range?
So the standard range for this, hang on, I'm just gonna look it up,
because I'm at that price. I'm thinking 180, 200 miles.
Yeah, so
that's my guess.
Polestar standard range single motor actually does 215 miles.
Yeah, it's not bad.
And the long range, hang on, there's a long range single motor as well, which is 265 miles. Which is,
so you're paying $6,000 more for another 30 miles.
Yeah. Now you're right. It's a lot of money to pay.
That's almost like Apple pricing for their increase on memory. That isn't it really?
It's quite it's quite similar to the Model 3 price. So the Model 3 price is 41k for the standard range plus, and it's 48k for the long range. And the thing is that all of these prices all got a little bump, because the grant was removed. So they were previously $3,500 cheaper. And I think that Polestar brought out a slightly cheaper model, realizing that people would be quite happy with it and it would compete well with a Tesla. But unfortunately, prices have just gone up a bit more. So there's not as much competition.
I know you said at the top of this podcast that we all agreed that 250 would be the minimum, but I think for 40k, I think I'd be very happy with 250 mile range. And let's be honest, that's the WLTP range.
Oh, I took the real world range from.
You took the real world range.
Yeah.
What's the WLTP on that then?
I don't know actually. We can find out.
Worldwide Harmonised Light Vehicle Test Procedure range, which is, I think, is different in Europe compared to America, because in Europe the motorways are different to American motorways, so you get less range in America than you do in Europe.
Yes. So the way that I do it is there's a website called EV Database.
Right.
And if you
sent me a link to that.
I'll put a link to it in there. And that gives you a real world range, which is pretty good, and it kind of covers you for most of it. I think that we've also got to remember how far 200 miles is, because the thing is, in the UK, it's not that big a place. So
that will get me to my friends in Monmouth in one charge.
Yeah.
Because they're 190 miles away. So if I live in Kent, I can get to Monmouth, which is just in the outskirts of Wales, in one charge using the Polestar.
Yeah, no, completely.
And that's the dream, really, because that's for us, that's the furthest we generally go. And I think it's a very reasonable range for that price, actually.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to remember that, we're in Milton Keynes. That's from centre of the UK, pretty much. So, we could get up to Manchester easily. We could go to Bristol, or we could go to Bournemouth without thinking about charging, just knowing that we can charge somewhere at the end.
Yeah.
We could go to Wales almost all in one go. Like, you could get quite a good part of that. But you could probably get to Snowdonia if you stopped for a top up at Telford or something.
Yeah.
So actually, at that point, charging becomes less of an issue, because you end up going, well, look, I don't want to drive for more than 2 hours anyway, thanks.
Yeah.
So I feel like that range is probably pretty good. And I think that people don't like having to change their behaviour because of range. But I do think it's kind of needed. And what we've got to do is try and give people a useful carrot. So people always think about the negative, but you actually need to say, look, this journey, it's costing you 50p. It normally would have cost you about 15 quid. Is that all right? And everyone will be like,
I think people also forget, don't they, Alex, about the maintenance costs as well. We'll mention that later on with our pros and cons. But there's lots of benefits for having an electric car. We'll talk about that later on.
So do you want to go through your options?
I was going to say, we kind of went for, shall we say, sensible cars, things that people could actually go out now, look up and buy. And with that, John.
Well, you see now, you said interesting electric vehicles, and I these are obviously unattainable, most of these for me, although I'm quite the Peugeot looks quite a good deal, but yes, I was very much taken by, I'm a gadget man. I know you are as well, Alex, but when it came to you deciding to go electric, for me it really was, if I like my gadgets, I want to get an electric car. And then when I realised the ecological benefits, we've changed over to green power in the house as well. So we predominantly charge our vehicle from our granny plug overnight, because most of the time I'm driving 10 miles a day from work and back, and so it's doable. And we have a lot of paid for chargers near us on the moment, because we're next to the M20. So I looked at the more sort of lifestyle vehicles here. Some of these aren't even available to buy. In fact, one of them's a concept car. But again, if you're listening to this and you Google these, you can see what they look like. The big one that was kind of hitting all the headlines recently was the Mercedes EQS. And I looked at a Verge video of this when it was still had its camouflage paint on that they lent the Verge. And the Mercedes EQS is basically the electronic version of their S-Class. And it's the one with the massive curved 55.5 inch hyper screen, with screens on the back seats for the passengers, and even a screen in the middle armrest that detaches to control the other screens. But it has voice control, and it has sort of like an Alexa style trim that glows as well. And I mean, if you've got money to burn, and this is £100,000, I think it's going to be ranging from about maybe £80,000 to £100,000 to buy. this is not the vehicle I'd be buying. But there'll be some parents at my school that will drive in with this, and there'll be people who are used to these sort of vehicles wanting one of these. And actually, this is equivalent in price to the Model X Tesla as well, which is usually about 150, 120 grand.
Yeah.
The Gullwing Tesla. So I was very taken by it. Again, we know that the S-Class Mercs generally are the leaders of new gadgets in cars, and that trickles down into other cars. And so you'll see in a few years' time some of the ideas from the Model S's and the Model, in this case the Model EQS, coming down into other cars. And so I think it's quite important to see it.
There's a good...
And if you get a chance to watch a YouTube video of the introduction, the unveiling of the Hyperscreen, it's quite interesting.
There's a good video of that because they're now starting to get production versions in the UK as well. So there's a fully charged review of it if you have a look on their YouTube.
Yeah, it's an interesting vehicle. My next EV is an interesting one. It's the Volkswagen Type 20. This is a concept car, and it only has a 10 kilowatt battery. So I'm not entirely sure. I think that's just so they can drive it off the back of the lorry at the showroom and back on again, because you can't, for a vehicle designed to go to the coast to surf in, which is always what people imagine camper vans are for. You get your surf bums going down to the coast in them, and it does follow the original kind of iconic camper van retro style design. Again, if you get to look at photographs of this, there's some very strange things going on with its wing mirrors and steering wheel, which looks like sort of molten orange plastic. And but this camper van has a holographic display. It has biometric face recognition on the entry. It has a voice assistant. I just think there's not many. There's a lot of, as you said, there's a lot of hatchbacks, a few sedans, but there's very few leisure, fun electric vehicles. And I think Nissan do a camper van style thing as well. My friends in Monmouth, who normally we go down and see them, and we plug our car into their garage, they are now buying an ID4. They've kind of seen us drive down, and they've kind of bitten the bullet. Their other vehicle is a van they use for putting their boats and bikes in, because my friend, she's a professional cyclist as well, and among other things. So that van is still petrol, but she's been looking for electric vans and really struggling. And you get a lot of them that are used for commercial use. But they're managed as fleets, and it's a slightly different way of doing things. So I'd be interested to see what comes next for people carriers and van-based electric vehicles for the consumer. The one on my list here that I'll probably be most likely would want to buy in terms of the cost, and I think this is one of the best cost range ratios I've seen in a vehicle, is the Peugeot E208. Which has it's 28k for the basic model, and it has a battery of 50 kilowatts. And I think perhaps that it might have a larger option as well, because I don't know if that 217 miles is the 50 kilowatt, but you can get a 217 mile range on that. For that price, is pretty good. But also, like the I think like the new Zoe, it has dual charging, so it can accept slow or fast charging, what they call ultra fast charging. So this can actually be charged on a larger battery from 0 to 80 in half an hour. Now, my Leaf can do that on a small battery, but being able to do it on a larger battery is really interesting. So the other clever thing they've done with this Peugeot is they've used the same body as the E208. And the challenge you have with electric cars is fitting the battery in. So what they've done is they've chopped up the battery, or placed the battery in separate units in all the gaps where the fuel tank and everything else would be. So it doesn't look any different, and it fits without any kind of trade-offs on the base of the car. I don't know if your MG has this, but in the Leaf, the seats are slightly raised. They sit on the battery in the car, so you've got very little space under the seats, if that makes sense. Whereas the Peugeot, I think, you wouldn't know it was electric from the interior. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
which is quite interesting.
Because what they did is the chassis they use for the E208 is a hybrid chassis, so it can use both electric and petrol. So there was space for a petrol engine, and then they take that out and replace it with the electric motor. That particular one, it has a real world range of 170 miles, which is not bad.
So the WLTP range must be the
WLTP, yeah, is like
it's like the best you can get.
That's like the turn
all the radio and aircon off,
and then go round in circles at a certain range,
yeah.
At a certain rate. But no, it's not bad, but it's still never quite real world.
No.
But even so, yeah, this is a really good one. And from affordability point of view, that's really good. The improved charging rate is important for some of the newer chargers. So the MG only accepts 50 kilowatt hours, 50 kilowatts,
right.
which is the same as your Leaf, John.
Yeah.
So
that's the Chardemo, is it?
No, ours is CCS. But yeah, so obviously the more power you can get in on the connection, the faster it will charge. And so it's about how it can handle that. So you'll see more and more that will accept 100 or even 150, depending on what the car is. And it will make a big difference for those longer trips.
CCS, by the way, is a standard for charging electric vehicles called the Combined Charging System, and it can provide power up to 350 kilowatts. That's the one thing I'd like to discuss later, is when we're going to get a unified charging infrastructure, but we'll come to that later on. A couple of vehicles here towards the end. These are the ones that are kind of would be awesome, but obviously beyond my price range. So the Jaguar I-Pace is a lovely vehicle, and I don't think there's much to say for this. I mean, you're getting your range from the price, 65 grand for kind of the average price for one of those new. That gives you just under 300 miles, 292 miles. You know, I would like that if I could have that, but that price is beyond my range. And then one that I think is the most interesting, it actually fits my brief as a user more than anything else, because I know you two are not. I know you especially are not, Alex. You're not a camper.
No.
You'd rather be at a hotel. My family love camping, and we've camp every year. Hence these long trips to Somerset. And the Hyundai's Ioniq 5, I am not sure yet if it's been released.
It's coming out late this year.
I think you can go to the site and you can put in a pre-order for it. But so this one's the selling point, apart from some of the nice things like it's got an AR HUD, a solar roof, which I think is an optional extra solar roof. This one has a battery that lets you plug your devices into it and charge from it. So if you're on a campsite, you can plug in a TV or an e-bike or a fridge freezer or a microwave whilst you're camping. Now, one of the things I do find when I'm camping is with electric cars, I don't know if it's the same for yours, is they don't charge when they're turned off. I know my old Skoda used to. So I generally go to wild camping. I don't go to campsites that have plug-in points, and you know, wild camping is a field with a dunny in the corner, basically. And so this would be ideal. The fact you could actually run things off it, which means it's got a bigger capacity. So I think you get 300 miles from the Ioniq 5. 300 miles, and it's about 45k. So actually, and that price relates to that's not a bad price too for its range, is it really?
No, not at all. I mean, it's one of those things where the Ioniq looks lovely, like from the reviews, and
it's got some lovely interiors.
Yeah, it's got really nice. I love the back of it.
It's got like a floating middle island, so you can move the middle console back, and it's got these things called relax seats. So the seats go all the way back, so you can sleep in them as well. So it's got two screens at the front and a very open. So it's very open. It's the nearest thing I've seen to a futuristic looking car that's now available.
Yeah, and that's
if you get a chance to look at the interior, it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's because it's one of the first for Hyundai, one of the first EV only chassis that is built. So it's not had to think about petrol tanks or where the engine goes at all. And the other thing is it has quite a long wheelbase. And so that you can have a long wheelbase if you don't need to have a big engine at the front or a big tank at the back. And so because of that, you have the wheels are right at the front and right at the back, and in between there's all this extra space. So even though it's actually not that big a car comparatively, you get a little bit extra space, and so it's interesting to see what they're doing with it.
And there's my 5. So quite an eclectic mix from both of us there, I think. Now that we've gone through these, and I think there are aspects of all these vehicles that we've all heard and thought, oh, that sounds nice. So the next question we need to ask now, if we could choose our next EV, and I think this is perhaps a better conversation for people thinking about buying here. We've got to think about all the pros and cons. What do you want? This is the main topic we've really been talking about. What do you want your next EV to be? So let's just go through some of these that could help a purchasing decision. And I think for the sake of our listeners, I reckon we should be aiming at let's say 42k top price.
Yeah.
Does that sound fair?
Yeah, 40, 45 seems about right.
I mean, if you want to get the discount, you're going to have to go 35.
Yeah.
As I said, I think that's a clever little sneaky trick for the government to avoid paying very much these days.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So let's go through. We're not being down on EVs here. Let's go through some of the cons so people are aware of them.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about the positives on the other side of
Yeah.
it. So, Amy and Alex.
So the main con that I think we've said many times so far is the range anxiety. Just because when you're transferring over to being an EV, you're used to having a vehicle that will do 300 miles. The idea that you'll be doing less than that does make people worry. It's a bit like someone being used to always having 50 quid in their pocket and suddenly they've only got 30. It's a change that you get used to. So the range anxiety is just the fear, in the same way that you might run out of petrol, that you might run out of energy. Alex?
Oh, I was just going to say that it's reinforced by knowing that you're only a couple of, a few miles away from a petrol station, and a petrol station, regardless of whether it's a little one or a big one, would always be able to give you petrol. And I think that's the difference, is that people kind of go, oh, but what happens if the petrol station doesn't do charging? And that is a valid concern, and luckily it's going to be reduced, because you will find more and more charging places at petrol stations.
I think you've probably seen this, though, both of you, because you've had your Leaf before.
Yes.
We've got ours. It has been really interesting watching the infrastructure,
Yes,
the number of charge points increase. And actually, I've driven to my aunt's in the countryside and discovered petrol stations with rapid charge, just one of them, rapid chargers on the forecourt that you can use. And I think we've reached that turning point now. I think people are recognising now there are more vehicles out there, more and more. And I know Tesco's are doing a deal with either Pod Point or Ecotricity, where they're trying to put more and more charge. I mean, it's a clever way of thinking about it. If someone's charging in your car park, they're there to buy food from you, aren't they? So I think you will see more. That infrastructure will improve. In terms of range anxiety, I think you're right, Amy. It is. You change the way you drive. I think I'm a much more careful, safe driver than I ever used to be. For a start, I tend to drive on motorways at 65 rather than 70. So when we first took our car out for a motorway drive, we were hooning down there at 80 to see what the car could do, and you could see the battery just going down visibly, because the Leaf recharges when you slow down. You've got like a Kerr system. Yep. Most EV cars do that now, don't they? They recharge when you take your foot off the pedal, your car will recharge as it's slowing down. So I think you do change the way you drive. You do change your way of living. I really like being a bit more thoughtful about my journeys. The children really like the stops. I know it sounds ridiculous. They like the stops more often because they're not stuck in the car. I don't find that's an issue locally, because we have enough charge points around us. We have a local M&S installed 20 charge points 2 miles down the road from. We have a McDonald's near us that has charge points. I can drive to my local Nissan dealership and charge for free still there. So, for me, even out here in the countryside where I live, it's not really an issue. I think people need to be aware of that. As pioneers 3 or 4 years ago, it was a little bit stressful now and then. And you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we've both done this. I've come back from Manchester in an electric car with my wife, and we've literally been driving down the cold shoulder to the next charge point in the driving rain at not even zero on our range. It was down to the 3 dots, and we were driving at 20 miles an hour and then slowing to recharge and driving, and we got there and we charged. It was, if you're going to push it to zero, I think the electric cars have a little bit of a buffer range in them still.
So they do, but we have actually run out on it. We ran out on a motorway on the slip road up to where the charging point was, because
on the basis that I was able to drive to my parents all the way down to London on a single charge. Alex took this as a challenge. Now
did he do like the Top Gear Clarkson drives to Liverpool on one tank of gas challenge?
No, it wasn't that bad.
It was. I'd done the journey in the daytime, and back in the day, if it was warmer, the battery just lasts a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Alex's job was to drop our child off to the grandparents, I think, for the night down in London.
Can I just ask, is he getting the blame for this?
Oh, he absolutely got the blame for this.
Okay. Right.
So
he's nodding his head, folks.
Now again, I'd done the journey on about 100%. I think he might have left on 90 or 80. It wasn't quite fully charged. Yeah. And I said, "Will you be okay?" Yeah, I'll be fine. It is night time, my love. You are going to be using all the things on the car and stuff. No, absolutely fine. And then I got a phone call saying that they were on the. Well, do you know what? You can take it from here, husband.
I'm sensing a bit of resentment. I don't know why.
It's all good.
The thing is this.
Wounds here.
At the time, there was two choices for charging. You could charge on the M1 at Toddington, or you could go to Watford Gap. There was nothing in between. There, literally nothing at all. So it wasn't like
half and half.
Yeah,
charge,
it was literally a question of it was either that point. And so I drove.
There are lots of options now.
There are now.
Great.
Yeah, this isn't the same issue.
Is really good for charging, by the way.
What happened was that I got to Toddington and I had plenty of range. I had I think the next stops were 25 miles away, and I had 45, 50 miles of range on the clock. So. And the way that I always used to work with the Leaf was basically roughly half it. And then that way, that's your worst case. So even if things don't go so well. So I thought, you know what? I think it'll be okay. And so but the problem is it was a guess. It wasn't like I didn't know it would be okay. The numbers were telling me it would be fine. And I thought, it'll be okay. So I just kept driving. And I don't know whether it was cold or what, but the range just started ticking down quite quickly.
I have seen that too. I don't know why it's happened. We were driving rain with a roof box on, so that's a factor.
Yeah,
were you carrying heavy load?
No, it was just me and my daughter. I think
a 5-year-old.
Yeah, I don't know why. And the thing is, I wasn't even going maybe I was going 70 rather than 65, but it was I wasn't going crazy speed or anything like that. And so then it just clocked down and clocked down and clocked down, and I was like, well, look, I've only got this option. And I should still be fine. I've got to keep going. And so it got to a point where I was, it said 10 miles worth of range, and we were 5 miles from the thing. And I thought this would be okay. And it just went down and down and down, and then got to the
exactly the same situation when we got down to ... as well.
Yeah,
we were doing exactly the same calculation, looking exactly the same. Isn't that interesting?
So, and then the thing is, what happens? This is frustrating for listeners, but the Nissan Leaf to help you remind you that you need to stop and charge doesn't show you the range when it gets really, really low.
No, it's 3 dashes.
It's just 3 dashes.
At which point goes completely. It's just 3 dashes.
You have no idea how far you have left, and I was like, the next stop is my charging spot. So that's and then what happened was it literally started slowing down, going to what's called turtle mode, and then I got onto the hard shoulder because I was like, this is a problem now. And then it literally stopped. It didn't. Turtle mode for some people goes quite a way, but this did not. So then I was stuck. Now the thing is, that's like the worst case. You think, oh my god, what would happen? Well, it's just the same as if you break down with a car in on the hard shoulder. It's no different than a normal car. So all that happens is that you ring breakdown, and you just need to ring breakdown people, and they need to pick you up and recover the car. And so we took the car back home. But it was quite traumatic to do that. But it's
some breakdown services, they offer this service. I know the BMW did that for a while as a sort of courier. They bring like a trolley, like a trailer that has a generator on the back that can charge you. You can just get your battery enough to the next station. I've seen that before.
Yeah, the AA do that now. At the time, Nissan had a breakdown cover included, and all that Nissan would do was give you a flatbed. They wouldn't do anything else. Yeah. And in fact, they would only give me a flatbed to either my destination or home. So they would literally say, "Look, where are you going?" And I had to pick one, so I picked home. But yeah, so as I say, it was one of those things that was very frustrating. But that won't normally happen so long as you have a bigger battery. And so I think the thing is, we've got to remember that, and also remember that the charging infrastructure is so much better now. Better. What would have happened is I would have got to Toddington, I would have gone, it looks fine, and then I would have got down to Luton or maybe Hemel, and I would have said, "Do you know what, I'm just going to take the next turning off, and I'm going to just charge there because it's a little bit early, but at least I'd know I'd be able to do it." And then that wouldn't have been a problem. Whereas, and that's one of the challenges is that petrol stations.
We're still learning, aren't we?
Sorry,
we're still learning about this. This is still in infancy, really.
Yeah. Well, also petrol stations are spaced a reasonable distance for petrol cars. Yeah. So whereas for electric cars, that's less of any. It's a bit more of a problem, particularly on the small range ones. I think what we ended up doing then is we ended up driving the Leaf less for long distances. Yeah. And because we had a petrol car, we just thought, we're going to do the petrol car, and I think that's quite a common choice.
To make a bit of a, what's I'm looking for here, an admission of guilt here. We are going to Somerset again this year. But this year, for the first time, we are hiring a petrol 4x4 to go down there. And that's mainly because where we go there's lots of high gradient locations near the coast, a lot of cliff walks. We've been down there in our Leaf 4 or 5 years in a row, and it's fine, and the campsite are nice about letting us charge overnight. I just bung on a brown beer token whenever we do it. But the issue is, of course, we visited everything in the range that an EV can visit in that area every year. So we want to go a bit further afield. My friend's father is involved with the Dunster farming show and things. So we just want to go a little bit further afield without the worry of that. And also, I was popping down to the local hotel, the local Marriott near that campsite, and sitting in the carvery for 3 hours with one pint, waiting for it to charge. That was one of my jobs in the daytime. And it means you lose 3 or 4 hours and I think EVs are not really designed for the West Country.
No, I think that's
fair. The infrastructure there is nowhere near as good as Central England, which is a shame. I think again it's getting better, and it will get better. Our campsites are going to have to start doing it when we all drive electric. But so we felt bad about doing it, but I think because it's a holiday vehicle, and it doesn't matter how much it costs us, it's still cheaper for us to do that than pay for petrol for the rest of the year round in a normal petrol car. We still make such a saving, it's fine to do that. So there is that as well. So we made the same decision about range. Amy?
Absolutely. I mean, the idea of getting an electric vehicle is, how far do you really need to go? I poodle to and from work every day, not very far at all. We were looking for an EV that would get me down to my parents and back in one go. We now have that, which is fantastic because it's about a 100-mile round trip. That's all we need. So if we do want to go further, we'll plan in a stop or two, which is fine because everyone needs to pop to the toilet every now and again. Yeah. And as you said, we've already said this before, if we're going to go on a really long trip, then we can just hire a petrol car for that weekend or for that week, and that's totally okay because we're aiming on what our personal range need is.
We see a friend in Manchester quite often as well, and we go up by train, and that's a lovely trip by train. We can sleep, and again, you've got to think about. We did make a decision to do this for the sake of the environment, and actually going by train is just as good for the environment because you're sharing a vehicle. And I wouldn't be surprised within 30 or 40 years' time that public transport becomes much more of an option for a lot of people. I think that the time of the long distance drive is waning, and unless we really sort out our technology, that's the way it's going to go. You've got to remember, electric powered vehicles are not the best option for powering a vehicle. They are a transition technology. They are not the best option.
So what would be the best option?
That I don't know, but there's going to be a better solution inherently for the world we live in, because obviously there's only so much heavy metals that you can gouge out the earth to make these vehicles. We're gonna reach the same point we're at now with fossil fuels at some point. So maybe John Wyndham's Dead Triffids really was not Dead Triffids, so the tripods really was a prediction of our future, a return to pastoral times. But that's way in the future. But I do think, I love my electric car, but I do think in the long term, in the next 50, 60, 100 years, it's still a transition technology.
I think it's one of those things that people will. So there's two things. So I think electric cars are great for the area in which you live, and I mean the wider area. It doesn't have to just be the city. It can be the wider area that you live. And for that, they're useful for anyone. Orkney, for example, is filled with the EVs. So I think it can be really good. I think the challenges that you have is for those few cases where you need to do long distance journeys. Previously, you'd just say, I'm going to go around in my little Fiesta.
Hop in the motor.
Sit in the motor. Where did you go to in your Clio? It was like Scotland or something. And you go, well, who would want to drive to Scotland in a Clio? Well, not many people, but you can do it. And I think the difference is that the EVs kind of will force you to choose at the moment. And in time, there probably will be better battery technology, or there'll be better methods of powering. But they've kind of, for now, this is what we're going towards. And so I think
you've got to remember as well, Alex, that the people driving to Scotland in their Clio are the teenagers, are the young people. Electric cars are expensive and not really attainable for first-time drivers and buyers, unless they are an EV DBI. Daddy bought it.
Yes.
So I think when the technology becomes as cheap as your banger from down Fred's car dealership, or when electric vehicles become ubiquitous, I think then that people will see them as standard cars.
Yeah.
But we are speaking from a position of privilege here, that we can afford to run these vehicles because they're not cheap.
That's right.
So that is a factor as well. And I think cars like the Peugeot that I mentioned earlier on, which is cheaper with good range and still looks like a car, I think when the companies pitch cars that don't look like electric vehicles, that are reasonably priced with a fairly good range, they are the ones that are going to be successful in the next 30 years.
That's right.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see some cities like London and Birmingham be electric vehicle only cities eventually. Someone like Sadiq Khan wouldn't put it past them to start that as a policy. That's the next phase in their kind of environmental push, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's move on. We've run quite long.
We talked
There's a few things that would be good to say.
We talked a lot about charging and stuff. I think we've proved that you don't need a charger at your house because you don't have one.
I just run it off of three pin. No.
I mean, we do, but it wasn't that expensive. It cost under £500.
And they generally help with the cost, don't they? The company.
So they do, but just don't expect it to be massively cheaper. So it's basically £500 with the grant. If you buy the unit, it's £500, and if you ask a Sparky to install it, it's about £50 to £100.
So when I bought the Leaf, they offered everything for free.
Yes, they don't anymore, but they did at the time.
And it was all okay, and then our landlord changed his mind, which was very frustrating. One thing you should bear in mind is our Leaf, which I think is the 30, or might be the 43 or the 30 kilowatt. I can never remember which one it is. That takes about, I would say, on a full charge, about 13 hours to charge from home using the 3-pin plug. And they don't recommend you do it regularly. They don't recommend you use extension lead, but we do all that.
Yeah.
It's never been a problem. I think you're going to find with the bigger battery vehicles, that's going to become a problem because they'll take 24 hours to charge.
Of a 3-pin,
Of a 3-pin. And so I think if you're listening to this and you want a bigger battery, charging from your house from the plug isn't a viable option. It's good for a top-up, but you'll find you'll have problems without an official charge point in your house.
I think it depends how far people are driving, because the thing is, if you're not driving very far each day, so say, for example, you've got a commute that's 20 miles each way, right? Charging off a 3-pin plug is fine. Like that won't be a problem. If you're doing 200 miles that day, then it's going to be using a fair bit. A 3-pin plug would probably not be ideal. Just spend the money and get the charging point if you can, or just say, okay, I need to actually start going to one of the nearby charging points and charge a bit more often.
Yeah.
If you've got a reasonable amount of range, so even in our MG, we're finding that actually at the moment we charge it maybe twice a week, maybe, and that's if we're going away a lot. So it's not that you have to do it every single night. You can, but you don't have to. And so I think that's one of the things that people forget is they think about it as this is a big faff. I'm going to have to do this all the time. Whereas actually the reality is you don't have to, just charge it when you need to. And for most people, that'll be fine. Amy?
I just want to talk about a very cheeky little perk of having an EV. When was the last time you were in a petrol station and they gave you free petrol? Never happens. But sometimes when you're charging...
Oh, no, I know this.
Yeah, sometimes when you're charging at motorway services, if you're very, very lucky, and if there's been an issue, then the people who are in charge of the vendor back in the call centre somewhere will put it on free vend for a bit. Which means you get free electricity, which is a bit cheeky, but it's free.
No, it's not cheeky. So when I drive up to the West Country quite a lot, that's the first thing I always check. You can tell by looking at the front of the charger. And I've charged all the way down to Somerset on one occasion for free.
Wow.
And I think, generally speaking, on bank holiday weekends, you get certain weekends where if they're changing their prices or they're doing something with their software, all the charges become free. And I think that's brilliant. You're quite right. So you've talked about that, a perk or a pro, or a good thing about electric vehicles. I'm going to say, Alex, let's end on this, shall we? I don't think we should talk about the pros. We should end on the positives because I think these definitely outweigh any of the cons. So let's all chip in here.
Waving,
Amy,
waving. When we first got the Leaf, because not many other people had Leafs, if you saw somebody with a Leaf, you give them a little wave. And
we still do that now.
Sometimes they wave back. Other times they just look at you like you're a moron. But when they wave back, it's always nice. And I carried on waving all the way to the end. Now I've got the MG ZS. I've only ever found one other MG ZS in the wild, and it happened to be the exact same colour as ours. It was like looking in the mirror or driving in the mirror. But I've not found a single one since. And we were on a journey. We went down to Windsor and back in it, and I did not see a single one. But my hand was itching and ready to wave. And I tell you, if you see a woman driving around in a blue MG ZS, it's probably me. And I warn you now, I will wave.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out for that. I would like to say, I mean, of all the stuff that we've been talking about this time round, I will never ever go back to permanent petrol. I absolutely adore my Leaf. I love it. It's so nice to drive. It's one thing you notice when you drive long distance in a vehicle is it's quite tiring. And the Leaf does have cruise control, and I tend to use cruise control when I know I'm going somewhere a little less distance, because you tend to lose a little bit of mileage on cruise control. Just the algorithm that works out your range drops by about 5 miles. I find that incredibly. I mean, obviously, a lot of cars are automatic and have cruise control, but it's not just that. It's the fact that I'm not using a gear stick, and again, that's automatic cars have that. But it's the feel of the vehicle. The Leaf, and I presume the MG has this as well. You can turn eco on and off, which basically, as we all know what that means, that basically means turbo mode. And I tend to use it for hills and overtaking from slower speeds, because the torque on those things are amazing. There's no gears, obviously, so you literally can put your foot down and leave other cars in the dust.
Yeah.
It's delicious when that happens.
It is,
it's
especially when you've got like an M class behind you, something like that. But I find that safer because you've definitely got more control over the driving experience. Because you're not changing gear, you've got both hands on the wheel, because you're not juddering after each burst of speed. It's a smoother ride, it's a quieter ride. So and we all know that persistent noises can damage you mentally and also just affect your driving. It's a beautiful driving experience. The Leaf is a very punchy drive as well. It's very solid on the road. You tend to find that batteries give you a better grip on the road because your centre of gravity is a little bit lower. I love all the extra bits and bobs inside the vehicles, all the extra gadgets, because generally they are a bit flashier on the interior. There's so much going for them. 3 moving parts, so The only maintenance we've done on our Leaf, apart from the MOT and the general service, is the replacing the tyres. And the tyres are quite expensive because they're eco-quiet tyres. You have to buy special ones for electric vehicles because they're less noisy on the road. But even saying that, I mean, comparing it to, we had a Clio of the same age, and the cost of maintenance was way higher. So, there's so many good things going for electric vehicles, as well as that smug feeling you get when you're saving the environment. The Leaf has a little graphic in the dash that shows you how many trees you're saving as you drive. Would you like to add to this, Amy?
Yeah, so I think the thing for me is, yes, the torque is really impressive, and that's one of the things that people forget about, is actually they're really fun to drive. So a lot of people go, oh yeah, but my Mini's really fun to drive, and you're like, yeah, I get that. This is also really fun to drive. I say, and they go, oh, but does it make loads of noise? And you're like, well, no, it doesn't make loads of noise because it's not a petrol engine. But no, seriously, and that's one of the things, like remembering Bobby's points about his MG. He was like, one of the things when you're driving a Mini, one of the things is, the pops that it makes, and it's like, it's not meant to replicate that. It's an EV is a completely different car, but it's still fun.
You can, I mean, some cars like the electric Porsches and the Teslas, you can download sounds, and obviously the Leaf makes a whine at a certain speed, so that it's there. I mean, you can turn that off, and I enjoy doing that to scare teenagers with headphones in. But you can, it does make a sound if you want it to for safety, and you can get those sounds if you want them. I don't think that's the point, though. I took a colleague of mine from work. I gave him a lift for his second vaccine jab. Get vaccinated, folks. Second jab, and he'd never driven an electric car before, and he was. We get used to it. I don't really know, but he was blown away by how quiet it was.
Yeah, I do find it. It's much more relaxing to drive. And that partly is because you don't have any gears, and it's also partly because you don't have an engine. So even if you were in an automatic car that's doing the gears for you, it's you have this. You don't have anything like that. It's just
as the synchro mesh changes. You don't get that judder, do you?
You don't have anything like that, and so for me that helps me relax and helps make it a more enjoyable drive for me. And I think it's kind of underrated for that, but it is really important. And also we've got to remember that it's all very well saying, oh, look, there's still a choice. But it is a choice at the moment. In the next sort of 5 to 10 years, they're going to look at phasing out new cars. I think it's to 2030 they wanted to phase out new cars.
Depends on the country, isn't it? But yes.
And the challenge with that is that if you're buying a car fairly soon, say in 5 years' time, you buy a car, by the time it actually comes up for the end of its PCP or whatever finance you're on, it's not going to have the residual values that it did, because people won't be buying as many petrol cars as they were. So do think about that, because actually it will have an impact. And particularly if you're on PCP, because the value of your car is important depending on how much money you get back from it. So so just consider that. And we can see huge demand at the moment. The challenge is at the moment we don't have the supply of EVs at the prices that people want yet, but that will come, and I can see that happening very, very quickly.
I normally say to people when they're thinking, they're saying, is it worth getting an EV or not? My view is, don't suddenly change to an EV. If you're at the point where you're looking at changing your car anyway, look at EVs. And if you've got a choice between an EV and a non-EV, and it's going to cost you the same, then it's your choice. But if you have a choice of littering or not littering, why would you litter? If you have a choice of buying an EV or not buying an EV, why wouldn't you? It just makes so much sense.
I do think, obviously I wholeheartedly agree with you about this, but I do think there is a certain amount of friction of certain groups of people. Currently over in Germany, people are shoving ground beef into the charge points of some of the charge points over there, and I think that's kind of a mirror of a certain entitled group of people like you get on the internet, like Gamergate and so on. I think it's a rare thing. I do find it puzzling that people do that. maybe there's better ways to cook your bolognese. I don't know, but there's going to be a group of, and I can completely understand. Petrol heads love the sound of petrol, the smell, the feel of it, and I think there'll still be, in 30 years' time, there will still be petrol vehicles as collector's items and racing with these vehicles, but they will become museum pieces eventually, and I think people need to accept that. Again, it's easy for us to say this as owners, but I think you're right, Alex, and you're right, Amy. I think people now, and I do see this from my colleagues, and I've seen so many of my friends who've seen us drive for 3 years who are starting to buy vehicles now, electric vehicles, having seen us go through it. And I do think the tide is turning, but I think it's going to take a bit of time for that to happen.
I think if you've got...
and there are, if you're testing the water, I mean, we have some other points we're going to talk about here, which you probably don't have time for, but you can get good second-hand deals, as you could get a second-hand electric vehicle as a test vehicle. It's a bit cheaper if you're not too bothered about range. If you want to buy a runabout to test what it's like to drive an electric vehicle, then you can get good deals on the Leafs and the Zoes, and they do. I think a lot of them, the dealerships now, a lot of the manufacturers are replacing batteries with older frames anyway. Think about how you're going to pay for it, and I think by the time you decide to buy a vehicle, whether it's 2021 or the next 5 years, I think we're going to have a better charging infrastructure, and probably reach a point where, as you said before, you can go to any garage and charge, and that will be amazing. Do you have anything else to add, Amy and Alex?
Yeah, the only thing I've got is it's not an all-in or all-out decision. So one thing that you can do that's quite easy is, if you're a 2-car family, don't all get an EV all at once. But if one of you says, we've got to run around, it's on its last legs, well, why not replace that with a second-hand Leaf or a second-hand Zoe, and then try that out and see how you get on. Because the thing is that a lot of the time there's a whole mix of people's needs. And a lot of the time, you don't need a car that does the 300-400 mile range journeys just to go to the station and back, or to pick up the kids and go and do the football on a Saturday. And so it's like, just think about those as options. You don't have to get a brand new or singing or dancing car. For that, you could just as easily look at a second-hand option, and honestly, range won't be as much of an issue for you then, because you'll be just doing smaller journeys, and you'll be able to, the risk is lower then. So it's good to do it that way.
Awesome. Amy, anything else to add?
Just that I know certainly Milton Keynes there certainly was somewhere where you could basically borrow an electric vehicle for the weekend and try it out, see how you get on, see how it fits your lifestyle. So hopefully that kind of thing will come back, and that's always an option. Otherwise, have a look on Drive Electric, is where we've leased our vehicle from, and it gives you a really good overview of what vehicles are available, the basic specs, and you never know, you might see something you like.
I think Alex will add into the show notes the relevant websites, but also the EV database that you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah,
that's quite
I'll
a good reference to you. Just to scroll through and have a look at those, because it is a big decision, and it's a balance of function and personal feelings on look and everything else. And much like choosing a house or choosing a school for your children, it's very personal, and the different criteria will be for you, for how you decide. Maybe it would be good to sort of revisit this topic in a year's time and see what's changed.
Yeah.
Or see how it goes. Anyway, that's been great. Thank you very much. I've learned quite a lot, as always, from talking to you two. Thank you so much. Where can we find you on the interwebs, Alex and Amy? Alex.
Oh, you can find me at Alex Hansford on Twitter.
And Amy?
Also on Twitter, I am Awakey.
And I am at John PR Evans. PR being... my middle name is personal relations, obviously. And you can also find our podcasts and everything else on our website, which is playpauseturn.show. Definitely not mirrorsignalmaneuver.show. That's a different website. And we also have a podcast. We also have a Twitter handle for Play Pause Turn, which is at Play Pause Turn. Not sure how much is being used right now, but we'll start being a bit more involved, I think, on Twitter with that as well.
You can also send us a voice message if you like. There'll be a link in the show notes as well. But yeah.
Well, thank you very much for listening, as always. This has been Play Paul's Turn, and we'll see you for our next podcast.